Welcome to Shadow Fear. Tonight we journey deep into the misty heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where beauty and terror walk hand in hand. These are 8 of the most disturbing true Appalachian horror stories ever told, from ghostly lights drifting over black rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Prepare yourself for 5 bone-chilling true Texas horror tales that blur the line between the real and the impossible. But before we begin, a warning. Most viewers make a fatal mistake. They leave before hitting subscribe, and when they do, they miss out on the darkest stories ever unearthed. Don't make that mistake. Hit that button now. Join us before the night claims you too, so tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Because in this place, time doesn't matter. The night is endless, and what's waiting in the dark is already awake now. Let's step into the shadows. Let's dive into the darkness. I've lived in Hardin County, Tennessee my whole life. If you've ever been out this way, you know it's mostly woods and water, quiet, humid, with that heavy kind of silence that feels like it's listening back. My name's David Henson, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the summer of 1972 on a stretch of water called Devil's River. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, most folks haven't. It's not on any official map anymore. The county rerouted part of it after the floods in the 80s, but back then it was a long, slow river that wound through farmland and oak woods. A few of us used to fish there, mostly catfish and smallmouth. My older brother Ray and I practically grew up on that river. We used to joke that we could find our way back to it blindfolded, just follow the smell of wet mud and honeysuckle. But now, I can't even look at water at night without remembering that light. It started one night in July. The air was thick, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the world feel slow. Ray and I were sitting out behind the house drinking a couple of beers when our neighbor, Old Man Halbrook, came by. He was a quiet guy, used to be a game warden, tough as hickory bark. He said, "You boys been down by Devil's River lately?" Ray laughed and said, "Not since the skeeters got bigger than the fish." Halbrook didn't smile. He said he'd been out there checking traps and saw a light moving along the water after midnight. Said it looked like a lantern just floating slow right against the current. He thought it was poachers, but when he yelled, the light stopped. Then it moved upstream, against the flow. He said he watched it for maybe a minute before it blinked out, just gone like someone snuffed a candle. We laughed it off, told him maybe he'd seen a reflection or some swamp gas, but he just shook his head and said, "It wasn't gas. It was watching me." Those words stuck with me, even as we joked about it later. Ray was the kind of guy who didn't believe in anything he couldn't punch. He said we should go down there and see for ourselves, maybe scare off whoever was messing around, so the next night, we packed a flashlight, grabbed Dad's old shotgun, and headed out. Devil's River was about 3 miles from our place. You had to park at the end of a dirt road and walk through a patch of woods thick with pine and cedar. By the time we got there, it was close to 11. The moon was just a sliver, the water black and still except for the insects buzzing over it. We set up on a flat rock near the bend. Ray had brought a thermos of coffee and we sat listening. Frogs, crickets, the occasional splash of a fish, nothing strange. Around midnight, though, I started to feel it, that heavy kind of quiet that creeps in right before something happens. Even the frogs went silent. Then Ray elbowed me. "Look," he whispered. Across the river, maybe 50 yards away, was a faint yellow glow. Small at first, like someone holding a candle behind the trees. It flickered once, then drifted out toward the middle of the river. Ray grinned. "Told you, poacher." He grabbed the flashlight, but I stopped him. "Don't, let's see what he does." The light moved slowly, bobbing like it was hanging from a string. But the current was flowing the other way. Ray cursed under his breath. "He's in a damn boat," but I couldn't hear paddles. Couldn't hear anything, actually. The light wasn't reflecting on the water. Either it just floated above it. That's when I started to feel the hairs on my arms stand up. It turned toward us. I don't know how to explain it, but you could feel it looking. Like a focus, sharp and cold, cutting through the night. Ray whispered, "Do you see that?" The light started coming closer. Not fast, just steady, like whoever held it had all the time in the world. We both stood. The shotgun felt like a toy in my hands. Ray yelled out, "Hey!" "Who's out there?" No answer. The light kept drifting closer. Then, just before it reached the bank, it went out. Total darkness. The air went dead still. We waited maybe a minute, maybe 5. Then from right behind us, maybe 10 feet away, something splashed, a deep, heavy sound, like someone stepping into the river. We spun around. Nothing, just ripples spreading across the surface. Ray said, "That's enough," and we started packing up. But as we turned to leave, I heard something, a whisper, faint and wet. Like breath through water. It said my brother's name, clear as day. We ran all the way back to the truck. Neither of us said a word until we hit the highway. Then Ray said, "We don't talk about that," and we didn't. For a while, 2 nights later, though he was gone. Mom said she thought he'd gone fishing. His gear was missing, and the truck was parked halfway down the road near the woods. I found his flashlight by the riverbank still on. The beam pointed toward the water. They organized a search party. Sheriff's men, volunteers, dogs. They found tracks leading down into the mud right up to the waterline. And then nothing. No return prints, like he'd just walked in and vanished. They dragged the river for days. Found a boot, a hat, a broken thermos. No body. Halbrook said, quiet as always. River took him. I hated him for saying that, but part of me wondered if he was right. Weeks went by. Everyone told me to move on, but I couldn't. I started going back there, not to fish, just to look. The sheriff said it was dangerous, but I didn't care. I had to know. One night in early August, I went alone. I brought Ray's flashlight and his knife. The air was heavy again, the kind that makes your clothes stick to you. I sat by the same rock where we'd seen the light. The water moved slow, like syrup. For a while, nothing happened. Then, just like before, the frogs went quiet, and there it was. The glow. It started downstream this time, a dim yellow that grew brighter as it floated toward me. My heart was pounding. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The light drifted to the center of the river, stopped, and hung there. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Slow. Crunching through leaves. I turned, expecting to see someone with a lantern, but there was nobody. When I looked back, the light was closer, maybe 10 feet away, hovering right above the water. It started to rise just a little, and that's when I saw what was inside it. A shape, faint like something seen through smoke. Shoulders, a head, on a face. It looked like Ray. I swear to God, it looked just like my brother. But the eyes were wrong. They were pale and wide, glowing faintly from within, like the light was coming from behind them. He opened his mouth, and the same voice I'd heard that night whispered, "David." It wasn't angry. It wasn't even human sounding, just wet and hollow like it came from deep underwater. I stumbled back. My foot slipped, and I went down hard in the mud. The light pulsed once and then flared bright, blinding. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. The river looked normal again. The frogs were croaking. The air was moving. But when I turned to leave, I saw them, 2 sets of footprints beside mine, leading down to the water. The second set stopped right at the edge. No return prints. Ray's body never turned up. People eventually stopped looking. Mom moved away. I stayed, mostly out of guilt. Every few years, someone new disappears down by the river. Hunters, campers, kids fooling around, always at night, always near the bend, and every time it rains, that stretch of water glows faintly under the surface like something still alive down there, waiting. I don't go down anymore. Not after last spring. A kid from town and high school age has drowned near the same spot. The sheriff said it was an accident, but I knew better. When they pulled his backpack out, I helped go through the contents. There was a notebook inside, soaked through. Most of the writing was gone, but one line was still legible. Follow the light. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, listening to the woods hum with frogs and cicadas. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker down near the trees, a pale yellow, drifting slow like a lantern. I blinked, and it was gone, but I still dream about it. In the dream, I'm standing on that rock again, staring at the river. The water's calm, glassy. I can see my reflection. And beside me, another one. He's smiling. And when I look closer, I see his face isn't mine, it's Ray's. If you ever find yourself near Hardin County, And someone mentions Devil's River, don't go looking for it. The maps don't show it for a reason. And if you ever see a light floating on still water, no matter how harmless it looks, no, don't follow it. Because some rivers remember what they've taken, and they don't like to be alone. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. Never have been. I grew up in a logging town in West Virginia, where you learned early that hard work and common sense were worth more than fairy tales. But what happened in 1988, deep in a place we called Whispering Hollow, still keeps me up some nights. If you've ever been in the Appalachian woods after sundown, you know that kind of silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence like the trees themselves are holding their breath. That's what it's like in the hollow. Whispering Hollow isn't on any official map. It's a dip between two ridges about 10 miles outside of Summersville. Folks called it that because of what happens to sound there. When you talk, the echo doesn't fade right. You could whisper your name and hear it come back, just a little wrong, like someone else saying it from somewhere deeper in the woods. Most people stayed clear of it, but for loggers like us, work was work. If there were trees standing, someone was paying to have them cut down. Back then, I was 26, working with a crew led by a man named Frank Riggs. He was a big guy, loud, rough around the edges, the kind who never backed down from anything. He'd worked those hills all his life. If there was anyone who knew how to handle a chainsaw and a bad omen, it was Frank. It was early May when our company landed a contract to clear part of that hollow. It was government land, supposed to make room for a new service road. We didn't ask questions. We just packed our gear and headed out before dawn. We set up camp on the ridge the first day. There were 5 of us. Me, Frank, his younger brother Gary, and 2 guys from town, Tommy Hill and Earl. By sunset, we'd already cleared a few acres. The trees were tall, straight, perfect timber. But something about the place felt off. For one thing, it was too quiet. No birds, no bugs, just the occasional gust of wind moving through the branches. Even the chainsaws sounded strange, like the sound got swallowed up before it hit the tree line. At dinner, Gary brought it up. "You guys notice how it sounds down here? Like we're in a cave or something?" Tommy chuckled. "Yeah, it's the hollow. My granddad used to talk about this place. Said sound gets stuck here. Don't bounce right," Frank rolled his eyes. "It's the shape of the land. You boys need to quit listening to campfire stories." But later that night, when the fire burned low and the wind picked up, I heard something, a whisper, faint, almost hidden under the rustling leaves. At first I thought it was Gary snoring, but then it came again, closer this time. A single word. "Frank." I sat up, staring into the dark. "Frank, you hear that?" He didn't answer. He was asleep. I told myself it was the wind, but deep down I knew wind doesn't say names. The next morning, we started early. By noon, Frank decided to test the echo thing. We were working near the center of the hollow, where the ground dipped low and the air felt thicker somehow. Frank switched off his saw and shouted, "Hey!" The sound bounced back a second later, but it didn't sound right. It was softer, slower, like someone repeating him just out of sync. Gary laughed. "Creepy as hell," Frank grinned. "It's just an echo. Watch this." He cupped his hands and yelled, "Who's out there?" We waited. The response came. Not loud, not clear, but it was different. Same words, same rhythm, but the voice wasn't his. It was lower, wet-sounding. Frank frowned. "You guys messing with me?" None of us said a word. Earl turned off his saw. "That wasn't us, Frank." The air went dead quiet again. Frank spat in the dirt and said, "Whatever. Let's finish this section before rain hits." But no one really wanted to work near that spot after that. That night, the whispers came back. We were all sitting by the fire when Gary said, "You guys hear that?" We went quiet. There it was again, a faint murmur weaving through the trees, rising and falling like it was breathing. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded almost curious. Frank stood up, grabbed his axe, and said, "Probably kids screwing around." He started toward the trees, flashlight in hand. "Frank, don't," I said. "Ain't worth it." He didn't listen. He stopped about 10 feet from the tree line and shouted, "Who's out there?" Nothing. Then from deeper in the woods we heard it, his own voice answering back, "Who's out there?" Exactly the same tone. Frank took a step closer. Cut it out! Again, the same words came back, but this time, it didn't wait for him to finish. It spoke with him, perfectly in sync. Frank dropped the flashlight. The beam swung wild and caught something in the trees just for a second. A shape, it wasn't a person. Too tall, too thin, and it was leaning toward him, like it was listening. Then the light went out. We heard him scream once. Sharp and quick, and then nothing. We ran after him. But by the time we got there, he was gone. All we found was his axe, buried halfway into a tree trunk. The handle was split from the inside out, like something had forced its way through. The ground around it was soft, but there were no footprints, none. Just drag marks that disappeared into the darkness. We called the sheriff that night. They came out the next morning with dogs and flashlights, but the weather turned bad fast. Rain came down in sheets, thick fog rolling off the ridges. By noon, they called it off. Said the ground was too unstable, too dangerous to keep searching. The sheriff, a man named Dorsey, pulled me aside before he left. "You said you heard something repeating voices." "Yeah," I told him. "It sounded just like Frank." He nodded slowly. "You're not the first to say that. Folks used to live near here back before the road washed out," said the hollow talks back, never the same twice. He looked toward the trees and added, "Best leave it be." We packed up that afternoon. None of us argued. 3 weeks later, I went back. I know how that sounds, but I couldn't shake it. Couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Frank's voice in my head, the way he shouted that last night. So I drove out alone. Parked where the dirt road ended and walked in. The woods were overgrown. The rain had washed out most of the path. When I reached the clearing, everything was just like we'd left it. Our old fire pit, a few rusted oil cans, the tree with Frank's axe still buried deep in it. I knelt beside it and ran my hand over the handle. The wood felt strange, smooth, almost polished, but there was a faint vibration underneath, like it was humming. That's when I heard it. A whisper, not in the air, inside my head. "Behind my ears. David." I froze. The voice wasn't Frank's, but it wasn't anyone else's either. It was a mix, layered, overlapping, like 100 people speaking the same word at once. "David." I turned toward the hollow. The air shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt, and then the whispers started again. Soft at first, then louder. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but they were everywhere. In the trees, the ground, the air. It felt like standing in a crowd where everyone's talking just low enough that you can't understand, but you know it's about you. I backed away, but the sound followed. Every step I took, it got closer. I shouted, "What do you want?" The voices stopped. Then all at once they answered, but not as whispers. They spoke in unison, deep and clear. "Stay." The sound hit me like a wave. My knees buckled. The trees around me shook, not from wind, but from sound. The axe in the tree vibrated, the handle splintering as the wood cracked from within. And for just a moment, I saw something move between the trees, tall, thin shapes like people made of smoke rippling in the air, each one whispering, faces flickering like candlelight. One of them stepped forward. Its mouth opened, and I heard Frank's voice say, "Why'd you come back?" That broke me. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Mud sucked at my boots, but I didn't stop until I reached the truck. The moment I slammed the door shut, the whispers cut off. Just gone, like flipping a switch. I never told the sheriff I went back. I didn't tell anyone. The company canceled the project after that, said it wasn't worth the risk. A few years later, the area got flooded when they expanded the dam. The whole hollow's under 30 feet of water now, but every so often, usually in late summer, when the air's heavy and the lake's low, locals say they hear voices drifting up from under the surface. Soft, like the sound of someone talking through water. Last year, my nephew went camping near there. He came back white as a sheet, said he and his friends heard their own voices echoing from across the lake. When they stopped talking, the echoes kept going. He asked if I thought it was wind. I told him, "If you ever hear the hollow whisper back, don't answer." He didn't understand. I don't think I do either. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I'll step outside and listen to the wind moving through the trees. And on the quiet nights when even the crickets go still, I swear I can hear it again. A low murmur, soft and patient waiting, Sometimes, if I listen close enough, I can almost make out the words. It's saying my name, and this time, it doesn't sound angry. It sounds lonely. If you ever find yourself near Summersville Lake and someone tells you about the valley that lies beneath it, don't try to find it. Because the hollow's still there under the water, still whispering. It never forgets a voice once it's heard it. And someday it'll whisper yours back too. My father used to tell me that every small town has at least one secret buried under its church. Some hide money, some hide sin. Ours hid a woman. I grew up in Rowan County, Kentucky, not far from the foothills. We had one grocery store, 2 bars, and 3 churches, though the one that mattered most stood on a low hill just past the railroad tracks, St. Matthew's Chapel. If you visit today, you won't find it on any tourist map. The county sealed the road years ago, claiming the foundation was unsafe. But the truth is, the foundation was the problem. In 1946, St. Matthew's was new. Fresh white paint, tall windows that caught the sunrise, a bell that could be heard clear across town. The preacher then was Reverend Elijah Coates, a man folks said had come straight from God's pocket. Humble, calm, with the kind of voice that made even the worst drunk sit straighter in the pew. What most people didn't know, at least not at first, was that the church wasn't built from scratch. It was built on top of something. There used to be an empty field where St. Matthew's now stands. Locals called it Witch's Acre. My grandmother told me stories about it, about a woman named Mary Holloway, who lived there in the 1800s. They said Mary was strange, that she talked to herself and gathered herbs by moonlight. When a fever swept through the town, people blamed her. Said she cursed the children. A mob dragged her from her cabin, tied her to a post, and threw stones until she stopped moving. Then they buried her right there under the rocks. For decades, the place stayed empty. Even animals avoided it. Then came 1946, and Reverend Coates announced he'd been moved by the Lord to build the new chapel on that very spot, he said. Redemption meant transforming sin into salvation. Grandma said folks should have known better. The first time I set foot inside St. Matthew's, I was 9. The floorboards were so new they creaked like someone sighing. But the smell, it wasn't new wood. It was damp stone like rain on old graves. People packed the pews every Sunday. The Reverend preached about forgiveness, about how God could make anything pure. Yet, as weeks passed, something changed. After the 3rd sermon, dark stains began appearing along the edges of the foundation. Small at first, like water seeping through mortar. Reverend Coates said it was humidity. By the next month, the stains had spread, turning rust red. One morning, my mother bent down to clean one near the altar. She came up pale. "It's thick," she whispered. "Like syrup." She said it smelled of iron. The Reverend told her to leave it. "Some things," he said, "are better left beneath the stones." That line stuck with me for years. By autumn, strange things started happening during service. Voices carried oddly inside the church. You'd sing a hymn and hear it echo back wrong, just slightly off key, like someone else was singing along beneath the floorboards. The choir director thought it was acoustics, but then the church organ began to play by itself. It always played the same tune, slow, mournful like a funeral march. One Sunday, Reverend Coates stopped mid-sermon, staring at the floor. People thought he was pausing for effect, but I saw his face. He was listening. Afterward, he locked himself in the church and told everyone to stay away until evening. My father, being on the maintenance committee, went back later to check on him. He said he found the Reverend kneeling near the altar, head bowed, whispering. The words weren't English. When Dad touched his shoulder, the Reverend jumped like he'd been burned. He said, "She's still here." The last full service we ever held at St. Matthew's was on a stormy Sunday in October. The rain came sideways, hammering the windows so loud we could barely hear the hymns. Reverend Coates preached louder, shouting over the wind. Then, in the middle of a verse, the church bell rang. It wasn't time. Nobody was in the tower. Each toll rattled the pews. Between rings, we heard a sound rising from the floor, a low moan like air being forced through stone. The choir stopped singing. The congregation froze. Then the moaning turned to screaming, not human screaming. It came from underneath us, dozens of voices, men, women, children, and crying out all at once. The bell rang again, and every lamp in the church went out. I remember the dark, thick, absolute, and the feeling of something moving just under my feet, like hands pressing upward through the boards. Someone screamed, "Get out!" and people rushed the doors. My father lifted me up and ran. The sound followed us into the rain, echoing through the hills. By morning, the church stood empty. Reverend Coates was gone. They found the Reverend 2 days later down by the creek. Half conscious and muttering scripture, he kept saying, "She's beneath us." She never forgave. He was taken to the state hospital in Lexington and never came back. For weeks after that, no one dared enter the chapel. But my father, practical as always, said the town couldn't just let the building rot. He and 2 other men went inside to assess the damage. They found the pews overturned, the hymnals soaked, and the floorboards warped from underneath. When they pried one loose near the altar, they discovered stones, smooth river stones packed tight together, and between them, black soil that smelled of copper and rot. My father said one of the stones was slick with something that looked like dried blood. He wanted to rebury it. The others wanted to burn it. In the end, they nailed the boards back down and walked out without saying a word. The next week, the bell rang again. 3 times, no wind, a storm. After that, the county ordered the church closed. For nearly 40 years, St. Matthew's sat abandoned. The roof sagged, the windows shattered, ivy crawling up the steeple. Kids dared each other to go inside. Most came back laughing, but a few came back crying. They said if you whispered near the altar, someone whispered back. In 1985, when I was nearly 50, I went back myself. My father had passed and I'd inherited his house. I couldn't stand seeing that building decay like a wound that never healed. I wanted closure, to see if it was really as bad as everyone said. When I stepped inside, the air was cold and still. The pews were coated in dust, but the altar looked freshly wiped, as if someone had been there recently. Then I saw the footprints, muddy, leading straight to the pulpit, and there, lying open on the lectern, was a Bible. The inside pages were soaked through, the ink bled into red smears. But one passage remained legible. "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." I heard movement behind me, a shuffle, slow, deliberate. "Who's there?" I called, no answer. Then a voice, dry and cracked, but familiar. "Elijah Coates," it said. I turned, and there he was, older, thinner, face sunken. But those eyes, those same preacher's eyes. I came back. He whispered. "She called." Before I could respond, he dropped to his knees beside the altar. His hands trembled as he touched the floor. "It's hollow," he said. "She wants out." I stepped closer, telling him to stop. But the board beneath his palm began to tremble. A faint hum filled the air, deep and steady, like a choir warming up before a hymn. The boards cracked. Dust rose in a thin line as something underneath pushed upward. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but he smiled in that same calm, sermon day smile, Bowen, and whispered, "Redemption." The floor burst open. A rush of cold air hit us, thick with the smell of iron and damp earth. Below, I saw the stones, wet, glistening, shifting on their own like something was breathing underneath. Then came the whisper. Not from the Reverend, not from me, but from below. "Let me sing." The Reverend gasped, fell forward, and vanished through the gap. The hum stopped. Silence. Then the organ began to play. I ran. By the time I reached the road, dawn was breaking. When I looked back, I saw the church bathed in that gray morning light, and the bell swinging slowly, though no one was pulling the rope. I told the sheriff. They sent men to check it out, but they found nothing. No body, no Reverend Coates, just an empty hole near the altar that led nowhere. The county finally condemned the building. They said the foundation was unstable, that the stones had shifted. A year later, they sealed it off with concrete. But that didn't stop it. Sometimes, late at night, the bell still rings. Folks say it echoes all the way down to the valley, low and distant, like someone calling for prayer. And if you stand near the hill, you can hear faint music, a woman's voice humming beneath the earth, sweet and sad. Like an old hymn remembered wrong. They say the sound's stronger when it rains, when the ground's wet and the stones sweat dark again. I don't go there anymore, but last month, during a thunderstorm, I swear I heard the bells from my porch. 3 slow tolls, followed by a voice carried on the wind. It wasn't angry. It sounded like it was singing. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I recognized the tune. It was the same funeral hymn the organ used to play by itself. The night everything went wrong, the same hymn that started when the floor split open and the reverend disappeared. I've tried to forget, to tell myself it's the wind through the valley or the train horns bouncing off the hills. But deep down, I know better. Because sometimes when the rain comes hard and the earth smells of iron, I can feel the ground humming beneath my feet, steady, patient, almost musical, and if I listen too long, I swear I hear her voice again rising up through the dirt. Not a curse. Not a plea, just one word over and over carried on the hum of the stones, redeemed. People always talk about the beauty of the Appalachians, the mist over the ridges, the sound of creeks running under mossy bridges, the smell of pine after rain. But there's another side to those woods, a quiet, empty side where even the animals don't go, where the fog doesn't burn off, and where sometimes, if you listen close enough, you can hear someone crying. I used to work search and rescue in western North Carolina, around a small town called Marble Creek. It's one of those places that isn't on most maps, just a cluster of houses, a diner, a church, and endless forest. The kind of town that whispers its stories instead of writing them down. In the summer of 2003, I learned one of those stories the hard way. The call came in on a Sunday morning. A woman from town had gone missing after hiking near an old mine road off Highway 19. Her name was Claire Denton, 34, schoolteacher, and mother of one. We'd had missing hikers before. A lot of tourists came through thinking Appalachian Trail meant a nice stroll. But this was different. Claire was local. She knew those woods. When we reached her car, it was parked neatly by the trailhead. No sign of struggle, just fog thick enough to hide a person 10 feet away. We followed the trail about 2 miles before it forked toward a dried creek bed. That's where one of my team members, Mike, stopped and pointed. Footprints, he said. They were small. Too small for Claire. Barefoot. They led away from the main path, deeper into the fog. Mike frowned. Kid tracks? There's no kids out here, I said. He shrugged. Could be hers, just old. But something about them bothered me. The prints were clear and fresh, but they didn't sink into the mud. It was like whoever made them was barely touching the ground. We followed them for half a mile before they just stopped. No broken twigs, no drag marks. Just gone. We called off the search that night. The fog had gotten too thick. I went back the next morning to speak with the locals. At the diner. When I mentioned the tracks, the room went quiet. An older man named Earl Simmons, who'd lived there all his life, finally said, "You saw the boy, didn't you?" "What boy?" I asked. Earl stared out the window like he was seeing something that wasn't there. "They call him the miner's child," he said. "Shows up when the fog's heavy. Asks for his mother." I laughed it off. "You mean a ghost story?" He didn't smile. "Ain't no story. My uncle saw him in '78. He answered him, and a week later, they found him out by the river, eyes covered up with his own shirt. I thought he was joking, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. You ever hear him, Earl added, don't talk back. Just walk away. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those footprints, small, perfect, and vanishing into fog. 3 days later, we got another call. A man named Raymond Miller hadn't returned from checking his traps near the old mine trail. We found his truck in the same place as Claire's. Same fog, same silence. We followed a fresh set of boot prints down to the creek bed, where they overlapped with the same small barefoot tracks. Mike muttered, "That's not possible." This time, we kept following. The fog got thicker the deeper we went, swallowing sound. You couldn't hear your own footsteps. Then from somewhere up ahead I heard a voice, small, high, almost gentle. "Sir, have you seen my mother?" It was close. Too close. Mike froze. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Stay quiet." We scanned the trees. The fog moved like smoke curling around the trunks. Then I saw him. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, standing in the middle of the path. Barefoot, wearing a torn flannel shirt, pale as chalk. His head was tilted down, hair hanging over his face. He said it again, voice trembling. "Have you seen my mother?" Something in me, instinct maybe, told me don't answer. Mike, though, stepped forward.
"Hey, kid, you lost?"
The boy lifted his head, and that's when I saw his eyes, or rather, the holes where his eyes should have been, dark, empty sockets, not bleeding or gory, just voids, like someone had cut the idea of eyes right out of him. He smiled, Mike shouted and dropped his flashlight. When he bent to pick it up, the beam caught the boy's face again, and he was closer now, only a few feet away. That smile didn't move right. It stretched thin and wrong like it didn't belong to him. I grabbed Mike's arm and yanked him back. Run. We didn't look back until we hit the trucks. By the time we radioed the others, the fog had cleared, the boy was gone, and so was Raymond Miller. They found Raymond 5 days later. He was 10 miles north, deep in the forest, sitting by a tree with his back straight like he was waiting for something. His shirt was torn into strips, tied around his head. When the coroner took them off, his eyes were perfectly fine. He just refused to open them. He stayed that way until the day he died, blindfolded, silent. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in those woods was watching us. Then Claire Denton's body turned up. A fisherman found her by the riverbank, barefoot, her eyes covered with part of her blouse. Her shoes were found a mile away, dry, placed neatly side by side. The sheriff shut down the trails, but the locals didn't need convincing. They'd already stopped going near that area. They said the hollow-eyed boy takes people who listen, that once you answer him, he knows your voice. I quit search and rescue that year. I told myself it was burnout, but truthfully, I couldn't stand the sound of fog anymore. Every time I drove past Marble Creek, that low mist would crawl along the tree line, and I'd feel sick, like something was waiting in there for me. In 2008, I moved to Asheville, started doing maintenance work for the Park Service. I thought I'd left that life behind. Then one night, 5 years later, I got a call from Mike. I hadn't heard from him since that day in the woods. His voice was shaky. "You remember that kid?" "Yeah," I said. "He's back. What do you mean?" Mike explained he'd gone back to Marble Creek for a reunion, and the fog rolled in thick. He was driving home when he saw something standing by the roadside. "A kid," he said, "barefoot, waving." I told him to pull over somewhere safe and wait for sunrise, but he didn't. He said the boy stepped into the road, and he couldn't just drive off. He rolled the window down and heard it. The same voice. "Sir, have you seen my mother?" I told him to get out of there, to not answer. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I already did." The line went dead. They found his truck 2 days later, engine running, door open. The fog that morning was so thick the rescue team had to use ropes to stay together. When they found him, he was sitting on a rock about a mile from the road, eyes covered with his own flannel sleeve. His skin was cold, but he was breathing. Barely. When they asked what happened, he whispered one word before collapsing. Listening. He never woke up again. I've told this story maybe a dozen times since then, and every time people ask the same question, "Do you think it was a ghost?" I don't know. What I do know is that something lives in those woods, something old, something that sounds human, because it used to be, some folks say, it's the spirit of a miner's child, that there was a collapse back in the 1920s and a boy got trapped inside with his mother. They dug for days, but never found them. When they finally stopped, the miners swore they could still hear her screaming from under the rock. And if you believe the stories, the boy still walks the woods looking for her, blind, calling out for help. But I think it's something else, something that pretends to be him, something that uses his voice like bait. After Mike's death, I tried to move on again. Married, had kids, built a quiet life far from those mountains, but sometimes, fog finds you even when you're not looking for it. A few months ago, I was driving home late around 2 a.m. on a back road near Black Mountain. The fog came in fast, thick and gray, swallowing the headlights. Then I saw movement up ahead, a small shape on the shoulder. I slowed down. It was a boy, barefoot, wearing a torn flannel shirt. He was facing away from me, head down. I didn't stop, didn't roll the window down. Just kept driving, but right as I passed him I heard it, muffled, soft, like it was coming from inside the car. "Sir, have you seen my mother?" My stomach dropped. I didn't look back. When I got home, I sat in the driveway with the headlights still on. My wife came out asking what was wrong. I told her I just needed a minute. She said something strange, that when she opened the door, she heard a kid's voice near the car. I didn't tell her what it said. Now I avoid fog whenever I can. I don't hike, don't camp. Don't even take back roads on misty mornings, because I've learned something, that it doesn't matter if you believe in ghosts or not. There are things in those mountains older than our stories, things that remember every voice that's ever answered them. Sometimes, when the night's quiet and the mist hangs low over the yard, I swear I hear someone outside the window, a small, patient voice. It never calls my name, it just asks softly, "Have you seen my mother?" And even after all these years, I still don't answer. If you ever find yourself driving through the Blue Ridge early in the morning and you see a barefoot boy standing in the fog, don't stop. Don't speak. Just keep driving. Because once you answer him, he'll never stop listening. When I was a boy, my grandfather used to tell me stories about the old woods near Grayson Hollow, a stretch of forest so thick with pine you could barely see the sky. He'd say the trees were older than the town itself, older than the mines, older than the church, older even than the people who thought they owned the land. He told me that if you ever got lost out there, you didn't yell for help, because sometimes the forest answered, and if it did, you'd better not answer back. Back in the early 1900s, Grayson Hollow was mostly farmland and forest. Folks made a living off timber, hunting, or the mines. It wasn't an easy life, but it was predictable, until people started going missing. The first was a trapper named Eli Turner. He was a good man, not the kind to wander far without telling someone. They found his camp a few days after he vanished, fire still warm, rifle leaning against a stump, footprints circling the clearing like he'd been walking in circles. The only strange thing was his traps. Every single one of them had been opened, cleanly and carefully, as if someone had known exactly how they worked. The sheriff called it an accident. The old folks called it the Pine Witch. They said she lived somewhere deep in the hollow in a cabin that grew out of the trees themselves. Some swore she was a hermit woman who'd gone mad after her husband was crushed in a logging accident. Others said she was something older, something that had always been there, wearing a woman's skin just long enough to lure people in. Whatever she was, they said she liked to play games. In the fall of 1901, a group of loggers were hired to clear part of the forest near the creek. My grandfather's father, Henry Lowe, was among them. He used to keep a journal, rough, simple notes about weather and wages. But tucked between the pages was one entry that never made sense to me until years later. It said, October 12th, fog heavy this morning. Heard someone singing by the pines. Didn't sound like no man I ever knew. Eli's traps found again, all sprung open. No sign of him. The men won't cut past the black stump. Say the trees whisper there. Can't tell if they're joking. The black stump he mentioned still exists. It's half buried now, covered in moss. Locals say it marks the edge of her land. According to what Henry told his son, my grandfather, things got worse after that. The crew started hearing voices in the fog. Soft, like women laughing. Sometimes they'd hear their own names being whispered from the trees. Then one morning, one of the younger men, a kid named Paul Hatcher, didn't show up for breakfast. They found his hat near the black stump. Inside it was a pine cone split neatly in half. Henry said the woods were silent that day. Not even birds. That night the men decided to pack up and leave early, but one of them, a hunter named Graham Pike, insisted on staying. He said he didn't believe in witches, and he wanted to prove the rest of them were cowards. He told Henry he'd spend the night in the woods and walk out by morning. Henry tried to talk him out of it. Graham just laughed and said, "If I meet your witch, maybe I'll ask her what all the fuss is about." That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Henry went looking for him the next day. He followed the trail down past the stump and into the hollow, where the trees grew so close together you could barely move between them. He said it was quiet, too quiet, except for something faint, like humming. The ground was soft with pine needles. The deeper he went, the stronger the smell. Sap, soil, and something else, something sweet that didn't belong. Finally, he came to a clearing he didn't recognize. In the center was a cabin, or what looked like one, made of rough boards and branches. But the walls weren't straight. They curved, twisting upward into the trees. It looked grown, not built. He called out Graham's name. That's when the humming stopped, and from inside the cabin came a voice. "Would you like to play?" Henry froze. It was a woman's voice, or low, smooth, almost kind. He didn't answer. The voice came again. Come closer. I've been waiting. He said. The door creaked open on its own. Inside he saw her, or what he thought was her, a woman sitting by the hearth, her back to him. Her hair was long and black, hanging in thick ropes that brushed the floor. She was weaving something with her hands, strands of moss and roots. Where's Graham? Henry asked. The woman didn't turn around. He played my game. What game? She chuckled softly. Riddles. He lost. Henry said the air inside the cabin felt heavy, like it was pressing against his chest. The smell of sap was stronger now, sweet and rotting all at once. Then she spoke again. Would you like to play too? He said nothing. 3 riddles, she whispered. Win and you leave, lose. The roots in her hands twitched, curling like fingers. I take something small. Henry backed toward the door. I don't want any part of this. The woman finally turned her head, and he saw that her hair wasn't hair at all. It was roots, thin and dark, writhing like worms. Her skin was gray-green, bark peeling from her cheeks. And her eyes, if you could call them that, and were hollow knots oozing sap. She smiled, and when she did, her teeth looked carved from wood. Too late, she said. You've already answered. The door slammed shut behind him. The cabin seemed to pulse, walls creaking like a living thing. The woman rose slowly, her limbs bending at wrong angles, each step making a sound like branches snapping in winter. Henry fell to his knees, praying when the air filled with whispers. Not just hers, dozens of voices, all speaking at once. Some pleaded, some laughed, some cried. Then everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, she was gone. The door stood open again, leading back into the fog. On the floor near the hearth lay Graham Pike's hat, and inside it something small and white. A tooth. Henry ran until he couldn't breathe. When he finally reached camp, the others said his face was pale as death. He didn't speak for 2 days. When he finally told them what he saw, they burned their tools, packed up, and left Grayson Hollow for good. Henry never went back, not even when land buyers offered him money for the lumber. He said the forest wasn't his to take anymore. A few years later, a pair of hunters disappeared near the same area. People said they'd been poaching deer. When a search party found their campsite, there were 2 rifles propped against a tree, and next to them 2 pine cones split perfectly in half. That was enough for the town. They declared the land cursed and fenced it off. Nobody's been allowed to log there since. A century later, in 2003, I went looking for that cabin. I was a forestry student at the time, working on a paper about Appalachian folklore. My grandfather's stories fascinated me, and I wanted to see if any of them were true. He'd died years earlier, but before he passed, he left me his father's journal. The last page had a rough drawing, a map of the hollow, with an X marked near the creek. It took me 2 days to find it. The forest was just as he'd described, dense pines, air heavy with sap. The stump was still there, blackened and smooth. I crossed it, and almost immediately the woods went quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of wind weaving through the trees and soft, rhythmic, almost like whispering. By dusk, I found the clearing. The cabin was still standing, smaller now, collapsed in places, but unmistakable. I stepped inside, notebook in hand. The air was cold and damp. The hearth was crumbled, but I swear I could still smell smoke, and something else beneath it. Pine resin, thick and sweet. On the floor was a pile of old branches woven into a circle. Inside the circle were 3 small bones arranged neatly, 2 finger bones and 1 tooth. I bent to take a closer look when I heard it. A voice. Faint, low, and coming from the doorway behind me. Would you like to play? I froze. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't far. It sounded like a woman whispering through wood. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came another voice, softer. A man's this time. Don't answer. My flashlight flickered. For a split second, the reflection hit the far wall, and I saw something move, a shadow, tall and thin, swaying like a tree in the wind. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Roots caught my boots, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back until I reached the road. When I finally did, the forest behind me looked normal again, still quiet. But I swear, just as I turned to leave, I heard laughter. Soft, high like a woman humming to herself. That was 20 years ago. I never went back, but I've never stopped thinking about it. Sometimes, when the air outside smells of pine, I dream about her. The woman with the bark skin and root hair, smiling with those wooden teeth. And in the dream, she always says the same thing. Let's play another game. I always wake up before I can answer. But lately, I've started hearing something else. Faint whispers when the wind moves through the trees behind my house. Sometimes, I swear they say my name. If you ever find yourself near Grayson Hollow and the pines start whispering, don't stop to listen. Don't answer the voice that calls from between the trees, because she only needs one word from you to begin her game. And she never plays fair. I don't talk much about my time working at Harlan Mill. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because folks around here still look uneasy when you bring up what happened. In the summer of '65, some call it an accident, others a curse. But if you ask the old-timers in Logan County, they'll tell you it wasn't either. They'll tell you it was the sawmill devil. The mill sat on the edge of town, right along the Tug Fork River. It had been there since the early 1900s, when the first coal barons came through and decided the valley's pine and oak would make good money. The land itself had a reputation long before the sawmill. My granddad used to tell me stories about that stretch of ground, said it had been a burial spot before the mines came, a patch of earth the locals called Devil's Acre. He said no crops grew there, no birds nested there, and every few years, someone who went hunting nearby turned up dead or half mad, talking about voices in the sawgrass. But business is business, and by the 1960s, Harlan Mill was the biggest employer for 50 miles. I started working there in '63, fresh out of high school. I was young, strong, and too dumb to be scared of anything. My boss, Earl Tinsley, ran the night shift. Big man with a bigger temper, known for keeping production up even when the machines were coughing sparks. The old-timers warned us not to take the night shifts, said the mill sounded different after dark. They weren't lying. There's something about a sawmill. At night that doesn't feel right. It's the noise, that constant mechanical hum, the rhythmic scream of saw teeth biting wood. It gets into your head, becomes a kind of heartbeat. When everything's running smooth, it's easy to forget where you are. But the moment a belt slips or a blade wobbles, the sound changes. It wails, and when it wails, it sounds alive. Our shift ran from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., most nights. It was just me, Earl, and 5 others. Bobby Greer, Mick Hansen, Russell Dean, Tommy Lane, and Owen Carter. Our mechanic. The first strange thing happened late one Thursday. It was close to midnight. I was stacking planks when the main saw screeched to a stop. Earl stormed over swearing, but when we checked the motor, everything looked fine. Then Owen pointed at the blade. It was wet. Not with oil, with something darker. Earl said it was rust. But rust doesn't drip. Owen wiped a finger across it and frowned. Feels like sap, he muttered. None of us said it out loud, but we all smelled it. That faint, metallic tang that didn't belong anywhere near pine wood. A week later, Bobby Greer lost 2 fingers on the planer. He swore the board pulled itself into the blade, said it twisted in his hands like someone was yanking it away from him. The company doctor said he was overtired. Then Mick Hansen caught a splinter in his eye, a splinter the size of a nail. He was standing 15 feet away from the saw when it happened. And Russell Dean, well, he didn't come home at all. They found him in the lumberyard behind the mill, lying face down in the sawdust pile. No wounds, no bruises, just gone. His face looked peaceful, almost like he'd fallen asleep. The sheriff ruled it heart failure. Earl said it was bad luck. But by then, we all knew better. The night it happened, the night they call the burn, started like any other. Hot, humid, the air thick with sawdust. The machines had been running rough all week, belts slipping, gears grinding. Earl said we'd push through one more load and call it early. Around midnight, the lights flickered. The backup generator kicked in, humming low. Then the big saw started up by itself. Earl shouted for Owen to shut it down. But before he could move, the blade screamed, and that high. Metallic shriek that shakes your teeth. Only this time, it didn't sound like a saw, it sounded like a voice. Low at first, then rising amid a deep, guttural howl that filled the mill and seemed to come from the walls themselves. Every board in the place started vibrating, stacks toppling over. The floor trembled under our boots. I ran for the switch, but when I grabbed the handle, it burned my hand hot, like it had been in fire. The others were shouting, but the noise drowned them out. That's when I saw it. Behind the main saw, through the haze of dust and smoke, something was moving. At first, I thought it was a shadow cast by the blades, but then it stepped forward. It looked human, but it wasn't. Tall, lean, the shape of a man, but the skin was black as tar, slick like oil. And where its face should have been was a mess of spinning metal, thin, circular blades turning slow and steady, whining like an old motor. It didn't walk. It glided. Where it passed, the wood darkened, curling and splitting like it was rotting in fast motion. Owen screamed and threw a wrench. It passed through the thing like smoke. The saw behind it spun faster, shrieking higher, the teeth glowing red-hot. Earl grabbed an axe and swung, but before it landed, the lights went out. All I remember after that was the heat, the sound of fire roaring up from the floorboards, and that laughing noise, mechanical and wrong, echoing inside the darkness. When I came to, I was outside. The mill was burning. Flames shot through the windows, thick black smoke curling into the night. The others never came out. They found what was left of them in the ash. No real bodies, just pieces of clothing, a few bones, and something else. A melted saw blade fused into the floor where the main motor used to be. The sheriff called it an electrical fire, but I saw what started it, and it wasn't any short circuit. A year later, the owner, a man named Mr. Harlan, rebuilt the mill, said he wouldn't let ghost stories and bad luck shut down a good business. He brought in new workers, new machinery, and ran it all by daylight only. But one night, he stayed late to finish paperwork. He told the paper later that he heard the saws start up on their own, said he could hear voices through the floor, men shouting, crying, begging, and underneath it all a low grinding hum, steady and sharp, like metal chewing on bone. They found him in his office the next morning, sitting at his desk with the light still on. His hair had gone completely white. He sold the mill 2 months later and moved to Ohio. No one ever ran it again. I left Logan County not long after. Spent most of my life trying to forget what I saw, but some nights I dream of that sound, that high whirring wail, and in the dream, I'm back inside the mill. The sawdust is thick, the floor is trembling, and I can feel that heat again, right behind me. Every time I turn, there's nothing there. Just the hum, then a whisper. Measure once, cut deep, that's what Earl used to say. Back when everything still worked, I always thought it was just a work saying. Now I think it meant something else. They finally tore down what was left of Harlan Mill in 1998. But the ground where it stood is still empty. Nothing grows there. Not grass, not weeds, nothing. And if you stand there after midnight, locals say you can still hear it. The slow spin of unseen blades, slicing through the dark. Some even claim they've seen sparks faint and orange, drifting up from the dirt like embers. A couple of kids snuck there one Halloween. They came running back 10 minutes later, white as chalk, said they heard a saw running inside the air itself, close enough to feel the heat, and someone breathing behind them. When the sheriff checked the place the next day, he found a mark in the soil, a perfect circle, like a saw blade had pressed into the ground, and in the center of it, a single blackened tooth. I've never gone back, but sometimes, when I drive through the valley at night, I swear I see it. A faint orange flicker deep in the trees, like the glow of a furnace that should have gone out half a century ago. The locals don't talk about it much anymore. But every now and then, when someone dies in a mill accident or a logging mishap, folks whisper that the sawmill devil still keeps count. They say he measures every man who sets foot on that ground, his height, his weight, his worth, and when the blade stops turning, he takes what's owed. Maybe that's why I still wake up sometimes to the sound of something humming in the walls. Not a saw, exactly, more like a whisper of metal, soft and steady, waiting. I tell myself it's just the old pipes or the wind, but deep down, I know that sound. It's the same one I heard the night the mill burned, the same one that's been following me for 50 years, and sometimes, when it gets real quiet, I swear I can feel warm breath against the back of my neck. Steady, measuring. like something standing just behind me, blade in hand, waiting for the cut. If you ever find yourself driving through Logan County and see a clearing where no grass grows, don't stop. Don't listen for the saws, because the sawmill devil still works nights, and he's always looking for a new man to measure. If you ever find yourself driving through Bradley County, Tennessee, there's a stretch of highway you'll want to avoid after dark. Locals call it Cold Run Road. It's only 8 miles long, but those 8 miles have taken more people than the rest of the county combined. It's not on any modern map anymore. They rerouted most of it after the accidents. But if you look hard enough, maybe take a wrong turn off Highway 64, you might still find it. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt swallowed by pine. Fog hanging low even on clear nights. I know that road. I grew up not far from it. And my grandfather was one of the men who went looking for the last family that vanished there back in '59. He never spoke about what he saw, not directly. But after that night, his hair went from black to white in less than a month. And for the rest of his life, he carved little dolls from pine wood, each one with its eyes painted shut. It started with the Dunn family, June 12, 1959. They were driving home from a church picnic in Cleveland, parents and 2 kids. Tommy and Lila, ages 9 and 11. They left after dark, taking Cold Run Road because it was the quickest way home. They never arrived. The next morning, a trucker spotted their tire tracks veering slightly toward the shoulder, then stopping halfway down the hill. No skid marks, no crash debris, just tracks that ended mid-road as if the car had vanished in thin air. Sheriff Murdoch organized a search party. My grandfather, James Harper, was part of it. They searched the woods for 3 days, found nothing. Then on the 4th night, they heard laughter. According to my grandfather's journals and the ones I found after he passed, the sound came from deep in the trees. Faint at first, like an echo carried by fog, it was laughter, children's laughter. The men followed it, thinking maybe the Dunn kids had wandered off. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog got. He wrote that the trees grew close together, the branches arching overhead until they blocked out the moonlight. The laughter never stopped. Sometimes it was far ahead. Sometimes it was right behind them. At one point, a man named Roy Tillman said he felt something brush his arm. Small, cold fingers like a child's hand, he shouted. Swung his flashlight around, but there was nothing there. They pressed on until the fog got so dense they couldn't see the man in front of them. That's when they realized they'd lost the road. Grandpa said they turned in circles for what felt like hours, hearing whispers and giggles all around them. When dawn finally came, they stumbled back into town, exhausted, silent, and changed. The sheriff said they were found only half a mile from where they'd entered the woods, but every one of them looked like they'd aged 20 years overnight. After that, nobody went down Cold Run Road unless they had to. My grandfather quit the search team, started working odd jobs, stayed mostly to himself. But people noticed things. At night, they said they could see his light on in the shed behind his house. If you peeked through the window, you'd see him sitting there at his workbench, carving tiny figures from pine, children mostly, all with smooth faces and eyes painted shut. He never sold them, never gave them away. He just kept making them row after row until the shelves were full. When my mother asked him why, he said, "Because they don't like to be looked at anymore." That's all he'd ever say. For a few years, things went quiet. Then in 1963, another car disappeared, a young couple, honeymooners from Georgia. Same story. Tire tracks led onto Cold Run Road, then stopped mid-lane. No wreck, no blood, no sign of struggle. When the sheriff checked the woods, he found something new. Toys, wooden dolls. Little ones like the ones my grandfather made, hanging from the branches by strings of vine. Each had its eyes sealed shut with black paint. People started whispering again, about the road, about the children, about the forest that kept taking. The county finally shut it down in '65, put up barricades, posted "Do Not Enter" signs, but even then, drivers reported strange things, headlights flickering in the fog, laughter on the radio, and sometimes just before midnight, the smell of pine sap so strong it made you dizzy. I never planned to go there. But in 2004, after my grandfather passed, I found something among his things, a folded piece of yellowed paper tucked inside his Bible. It was a map. Cold Run Road, drawn in shaky pencil, with a red X about halfway down. Next to it, in his handwriting, were 3 words. They're still there. I don't know what possessed me to go. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper and a pull I can't explain. But one autumn night I drove out there. The road was easy enough to find. The barricades were long gone and the sign was half buried in weeds. Fog hung low over the ground, thick and pale, swirling like breath. The forest pressed in close, the trees leaning over the asphalt as if listening. I parked and started walking. The air smelled sweet. Pine and something else, faintly metallic like old pennies. About a mile in, I found them, tire tracks. They ended exactly as the story said, right in the middle of the road. The rubber melted into the asphalt like it had sunk there. Next to them lay something small, a toy, a wooden doll, half buried in leaves. Its eyes were shut, black paint cracked and peeling. I picked it up without thinking. The air went still. Then I heard it. Faint at first. Then closer, laughter. Children's laughter. Drifting through the fog, my flashlight flickered. The beam caught movement between the trees. Something pale darting past. Small and fast. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe. But deep down I knew better. The laughter grew louder, overlapping, echoing from all directions. I turned to head back, but the road behind me was gone, swallowed by fog. Then, through the haze, I saw shapes, little figures stepping out of the tree line. They looked like children, maybe half a dozen of them. Barefoot, clothes ragged and gray with dust. Their faces were pale, their skin smooth and shiny like wood. One of them tilted its head and smiled. "Are you lost?" it asked. Its voice was small, hollow. Another one giggled and took a step closer. I stumbled back, clutching the doll. The moment I did, they all stopped moving. They stared at it, or I think they did. It's hard to tell when something has no eyes. One of them whispered, "She has our toy." The air grew cold. The fog thickened until I couldn't see my own hands. Then a voice, older, softer, came from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Bring it back." I turned and ran. Branches scraped my arms. Roots caught my feet. But I didn't stop until I saw the glow of my car's headlights cutting through the mist. When I slammed the door, I swear I heard them, faint tapping on the glass, like little fingers drumming against it. Then the laughter faded. By the time I made it back to the highway, the doll was gone from the seat beside me. It's been 20 years since that night, and I still think about it every time fog rolls across the valley. Cold Run Road is buried now, repaved, rerouted, forgotten. But if you stand on the new highway at night, you can still see the outline of the old one in the woods, faint and cracked under the moonlight. And if you listen, really listen, sometimes you can still hear laughter, far off, like it's coming from under the ground. After my grandfather died, I inherited his old workshop. I went through it a few weeks ago. On the back shelf behind a stack of old paint cans, I found something wrapped in a cloth. A pinewood doll. Its eyes were painted shut, just like the others. But on the back, carved deep into the grain, were 4 names: Eli Dunn, Lila Dunn, Raymond and Clara, the missing family. The wood was warm to the touch, even after all these years. That night, I dreamed of fog, thick and white, rolling over the trees. And in the fog I saw them, the children. They weren't laughing this time. They were standing still, watching me. One of them stepped forward and whispered, "You have our names." When I woke up, my hands smelled of pine, and on the table beside my bed lay the doll, unwrapped, clean, the eyes open now, painted blue. I burned it the next morning, but sometimes, when the nights are quiet, I swear I still hear them. Faint voices outside my window, whispering through the fog, not laughter anymore. Just soft rhythmic humming, like a lullaby sung for no one. And once, just once, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, no one was there. But the air smelled of pine sap, and on the porch railing, someone had left a small wooden toy. A child, smiling, its eyes painted shut. If you ever find yourself on a foggy Tennessee road and you hear children laughing in the trees, don't stop. Don't listen. Because on Cold Run Road, the laughter means you've already been seen. And once the children notice you, you don't find your way back alone. People like to talk about how peaceful the Appalachian Trail is. The quiet mornings, the fog rolling through the mountains, the smell of pine and rain. But anyone who's spent more than a few nights out there knows the woods have their own kind of language. A language that isn't written or spoken, it's felt. And sometimes if you stay long enough, it starts speaking back. I used to hike the trail every summer. Started in my 20s, back when I still thought I was invincible. It was my way of getting away from people. From noise, from everything. In 2019, I took 2 months off work to hike a long section solo, the stretch through Laurel Gap, deep in North Carolina's mountains. I'd been there before, but never alone. If I'd known what waited for me there, I never would have gone back. I started in Hot Springs and hiked south toward the Smokies. The weather was perfect. Late May, clear skies, not too hot. By the third day, I'd only passed 2 other hikers. That's the thing about the southern parts of the trail. It can feel empty even when you're not far from towns. I reached Laurel Gap Shelter just before dusk. It's an old 3-walled structure with a tin roof, sitting in a low valley surrounded by spruce and fir. I set up my tent a few hundred feet from it, just far enough to feel alone. The forest was quiet except for wind in the trees and the occasional creak of branches. After dinner, I built a small fire and leaned back against my pack. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, and that stillness, that silence. Then I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the firelight. A dark shape standing between 2 trees, maybe 30 yards out. He was tall, thin, perfectly still. His head was tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening. I called out, thinking it was another hiker. "Hey there!" "You lost?" No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward him. Nothing. Just trees. When I sat back down, my heart was still pounding. I told myself it was fatigue, shadows, the way fire messes with your depth perception. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard footsteps, soft ones pacing just beyond the edge of my camp. The next morning, the woods looked normal again. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. I packed up and moved on, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Like someone was walking a few paces behind me, just out of sight. It wasn't paranoia. I've been in the woods enough to know when I'm not alone. By the second night, the wind had picked up. The trees made that low moaning sound, the kind that never seems to come from one direction. I found a flat spot near a ridge, set up camp and lit a small fire. I was eating when I heard it again, a single twig snapping, then another. I turned my headlamp toward the sound and nothing but fog drifting between the trunks, but I knew he was there. The silence that follows movement in the woods is the loudest thing in the world. I sat there for almost an hour, staring into the dark. Finally, I said, "If you're lost, you can come closer. I've got food." The wind stopped. The fire crackled once, and from somewhere deep in the trees, a whisper, my name. Not shouted, not mistaken. Spoken softly, clearly. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my trail name, not even the 2 hikers I'd passed earlier. I didn't hear it again that night, but I packed up before dawn and started walking north, faster than I ever had before. By the time I reached Laurel Fork, I was exhausted. I decided to stay near an old campsite just off the trail. There were signs someone else had been there recently. Ash in the fire pit, boot prints in the mud. I was relieved. Maybe it meant I wasn't the only one seeing things. Around sunset, I heard rustling down by the creek. I called out, "Hey, you camping nearby?" No answer. I followed the sound with my flashlight, scanning between the trees. That's when I saw him again, standing on the opposite bank. Same silhouette, tall, thin, head tilted just slightly, like he was listening. The beam of my flashlight hit him square in the chest, but there was no reflection. No color, just black. I shouted, "Who are you?" He didn't move. Then my light flickered, just for a second, and then he was gone. I stayed up the whole night, clutching my knife and trying not to breathe too loudly. The forest stayed dead quiet. Until around 3 a.m., when I heard that same whisper again, close enough to feel the air move by my ear, my name. At sunrise, I decided to get off the trail. I wasn't imagining things anymore. I knew someone was following me. I hiked fast, barely stopping to drink. Around noon, I started hearing something strange. 2 sets of footsteps. One was mine. The other lagged just slightly behind. When I stopped, it stopped. When I sped up, it did too. By the time I reached the ridge above Laurel Gap, the air was thick with fog. I could barely see 5 feet ahead. I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow. Steady. Right behind me, I turned around. Nothing, but then, just as I lowered my pack, I saw him again, standing in the fog. Maybe 10 feet away, close enough to make out his shape. Tall. Almost too tall, with limbs a little too long. His clothes hung loose, gray and faded. His head was tilted toward me again, as if listening. I said, barely above a whisper, "What do you want?" The fog moved around him, and then I heard it. Dozens of whispers overlapping, like the trees themselves were speaking through him. They said my name again, over and over. Each time, the voice got lower, heavier, like it was sinking into the ground. I backed away until my heel hit a rock and I fell. When I looked up, he was gone. The woods were empty again, but I could still hear it. That breathing, right next to my ear. I ran until my lungs burned, until the fog thinned and I saw sunlight breaking through the trees. It took me 2 days to reach the next ranger station. They checked the trail, said there were no other hikers registered in that section during the week I was there. No footprints, no campsites, no signs of anyone following me. One of the rangers, and an older woman who'd worked there for years, listened quietly as I told her what happened. When I finished, she asked where I'd seen him. "Laurel Gap," I said. She nodded slowly. "You're not the first." Then she told me about a woman they found back in 2007, solo hiker. She'd made camp in the same area. When search and rescue found her, she was half delirious, dehydrated, claiming a man had followed her for 3 nights, said he whispered her name, even though she'd never told anyone. The ranger asked her how she thought he knew it. The woman said, "The forest already knows. He's just the one who listens. It's been 6 years since that hike, and I haven't gone back, but sometimes, when I'm driving through the Blue Ridge early in the morning and the fog drifts low across the road, I'll see shapes between the trees, tall ones, still, tilting their heads slightly, as if they're listening. I tell myself it's shadows, tricks of light, but then I'll hear it, faint, almost carried by the wind. My name. Once I mentioned it on a hiking forum. Told the story just like I told you. Within an hour, someone messaged me privately, said they'd seen him too. They'd been camping near Laurel Gap the year before and woke up to find footprints circling their tent. Barefoot, but deep, as if whoever made them was heavy. They said that when they followed the tracks, they ended abruptly near a tree, the bark pressed inward like someone had leaned there, listening, and carved into the trunk were words that made my stomach drop. The forest knows. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't even like walking near tree lines at night. But last fall I went to visit my brother in Asheville. We drove up into the mountains one morning to watch the sunrise. On the way back, fog rolled in thick over the road, and as we came around a bend, I saw him standing at the tree line, tall, thin, head tilted. He didn't move. Didn't raise a hand. Just watched. My brother saw him too. He slowed the car, squinting. "You see that guy?" I said, "Keep driving." When I looked in the side mirror, he was gone. That night, as I lay in bed, half asleep, I heard something, soft, steady, someone breathing near the window. Then a whisper, almost gentle, right next to the glass, my name. "If you ever camp on the Appalachian Trail near Laurel Gap, don't stare too long into the trees. Don't call out when you see someone watching from the fog, because he's not lost. He's listening. And the forest already knows who you are."